last weekend in the UFC, it was kind of like Michael Buffer always used to say, for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world, you had Nurullo Aliyev making that debut, Tajikistan on the world stage. They filled what, like a soccer stadium?
That was incredible,
He had so many people excited about his fight. Now, all of a sudden, a week later, on short notice, Tajikistan gets a second opportunity on the ultimate proving ground. We have the former two-time PFL $1 million challenger up there for the tournament championships in the Jaguar Paw, Loik Radzhabov. And just last week, we said at the end of the video, look up in the corner of this room. We got Loik hanging out there, and we didn't even know that he was going to be making this debut on this short of notice against a guy with a 100% finishing rate out of Argentina, the former Samurai Fight House champ. It is El Gringo, Esteban Ribovics, and this is a really fun fight because these two guys, if you haven't watched the tape on them, stylistically match up very, very well. And a lot of people might be familiar with the man on the left-hand side of the screen in Loik Radzhabov, and he's one of my favorite guys to watch throughout the seasons of the PFL because you talk about a guy with a finishing rate, and I know it's not to the 100% like a guy like Ribovics, but it's because Radzhabov's fought a very high level of competition, and even in his last fight, you'll see the asterisks on the screen. It was a short notice catchweight fight, super lightweight against Zach Zane, who's fought for Ryzen, Contender Series.
He's been around.
He's fought with Bellator. He's fought with Titan. Zach Zane has been around. Loik Radzhabov went in there and said, He goes for the takedown. Zane gets him in that really weird Kimura lock. What does Radzhabov do? Flips out of it.
Exactly.
He ends up in a good position. He gets the finish against Zach Zane. But Radzhabov, you know him for the wild looping hooks. You know him for the heavy power. You know him for his power bar. We're going to talk about power bar later on this card. Yes. Marc-Andre Barriault, a guy who stays steady throughout his fights. Radzhabov tends to burn hot. And then he goes down a little bit.
That's a bit of an issue.
5-round fights, not as much. It's been weird. But for Radzhabov, all gas, no breaks. You hate to talk about it. But early morning on Sunday, February 26th, is when it was announced that Loik Radzhabov would be into this fight. It was Igor Lazarin reporting that over on Twitter. So it has to be mentioned that he's replacing him on about a week's notice. He's replacing Kamwela Kirk in this matchup.
And that would have been a fun fight, too.
And it would have been. But the weirdest part about this is, you had Gilbert Burns coming out on Twitter not that long ago in the last couple of weeks defending Loik Radzhabov because it seemed like he'd be one of those veterans that would end up on The Ultimate Fighter, like Austin Hubbard, like Brad Katona, who's on the season. There are a lot of these, Jason Knight's another one of them, that was going to end up on that season.
Roosevelt Roberts.
Did McGregor bring in his own guys? Did he not? We don't know. But all of a sudden now, Radzhabov goes from Aliyev makes that debut, has all the fans behind him, and then that next day or in that 24 hours, Radzhabov's in the UFC, and he's getting an opportunity against a very, very hype prospect.
It is a difficult fight for him, but here's the thing about Radzhabov. It will be interesting to see how he progresses in the UFC because his strengths are very obvious, but he does have some obvious weaknesses as well. He kind of fights like more high-volume Dan Henderson to a certain degree. He is very high up with his boxing stance, and he's not a huge kicker. He'll throw a light kick every now and then, and I would say he has become more of a kicker as his career has progressed.
They do a lot of damage as it's progressed.
Exactly.
They have done damage.
But he doesn't really go to the body or the head, and he does have to get close to get a lot of his effective damage done. Now, and you brought it up too, when he's able to implement the takedown into his game and get on top of his opponent, he is a very damaging grappler, and he's an intelligent grappler too, because he's not just good in those set positions that we all know, the full guards, the half guards. He's someone who is comfortable with scrambling and can be comfortable in uncomfortable positions. And I know that might seem like a cliche, but it's a very nice skill to have when you're making your UFC debut, and that's why I am happy that Radzhabov doesn't have to take the Ultimate Fighter route, because he's too good to be on the Ultimate Fighter, for being honest. Now,
a lot of those guys are.
Exactly. I know this season they might be doing a new twist or whatever. They're bringing back former fighters, but Radzhabov has fought some very good fighters in the past. You brought it up. His level of competition is very good, but the thing about Radzhabov is, if you're a high-volume fighter with a lot of long-range attacks, who has good takedown defense, and I know I'm starting to build up a pretty good fighter right now, but there's guys like that who exist out there, and there's a lot of them in the UFC, you can start to gain offense against him at distance, and I will be curious to see if Radzhabov can continue to progress at the UFC level, because he is still in his early 30s, but he has been fighting this way for a while now, so I'll just be curious to see if he can implement some more of those longer range weapons, because I think once he is able to do that, that's really going to be able to kind of finish out his skill set.
And if I was able to use Dana White's wording and my own verbiage, I would say Loik Radzhabov, the kid's shop worn, because if you look at his fights, he hammers the shots, and he does tend to tire as fights go on, but he fights at a high pace when they start, and he really does like to go for the grappling. And you look at some of his takedowns, he'll do a body lock to then trip. He'll pick you up and throw you. Like, he is a bit of an unorthodox takedown artist.
He has a good chin, I will say this. He has been cracked by some good shots in the past, and he has been able to stand up to them.
His fight IQ is very good, because when he gets hit, he then tends to wrestle. He's kind of like a Michael Chandler in that respect. Not that he really does fight like Chandler, but you go down through Radzhabov's record, 7 wins by knockout, 5 by submission. The only losses on his record are by decision. One against Raush Manfield. That was in the 2021 PFL Finals. Now,
that was a good fight, too.
Yeah, it was a good fight, and Radzhabov was a heavy favorite to win that. If you went by the verdict scorecards,
the higher ceiling.
Radzhabov was the winner, but if you go by actually using your eyeballs and watching the fight, Manfield won 2 of the rounds.
He landed a lot of right hands.
If you look at it, yeah, Manfield landed the right hand. There were some takedowns and some scrambles in that fight. There were some big shots by Radzhabov as well, and his gas tank actually held up pretty well. And Manfield, to his credit, was a super underdog to win the season. He was a plus 1,000 at the start of the year. Lost by split decision to Alex Martinez, the half Canadian. He was able to get that back on that season. He lost to Natan Schultz in the PFL Finals the season before. He has a draw on his record to Islam Mamedov, who's now, 22-2 over with Bellator. And in that fight, it was a draw. And then at the end, they went, we're going to a judge's decision as to who moves on in the tournament. And they all decided it was Radzhabov, and the other lost to Rashid Magomedov. So
a good fighter, but you would never pay money to watch that man fight.
But Radzhabov tends to struggle against pure grapplers and guys that can throw a lot of volume on the outside. And everybody in between, apart from that, he's able to have a lot of success against. So a lot of fun in these fights. You want to see a big highlight reel win for Radzhabov. It's his win in 2021 over Akhmed Aliyev, who had a great record and a great level of competition. He goes into that one. He stalks him, throws an uppercut, and then he goes, left hook, right hook. He drops him. He ends up getting the TKO finish in 27 seconds. But I mean, other than that, I can go all through the Manfield fight. I can go through a lot of these fights that Radzhabov's had. But I want to say this, Matt, when I hand it off to you. For Esteban Ribovics, the prospect that's out of Argentina, first weird thing about this fight, both guys train at Killcliff FC, and they both have for a very long time. Second of all, they both fight kind of similarly, and they're both very well-rounded, and the volume aspect might actually go to Ribovics in this one.
And I think he might be the more varied striker. I don't think he is the more varied striker. The thing about Ribovic is it Ribovic?
Ribovics.
Ribovics. Now, here's the thing about him. I think that as the fight progresses, this is my big thing with Radzhabov. If he has a lot of success early, that's what you do worry about his cardio. He's a guy who, if he does grapple a lot and he's having a lot of success with his own grappling, that's when his own power bar can start, or it can fade as the fight goes on. If Esteban can take advantage of that, and you hate to say burn around because that's not the best strategy, but you get the idea. You can lose the battle and win the war as a result. If Esteban does give up a couple takedowns here or there, he does have great up the middle attacks, and that's the one thing about that's the one thing about Radzhabov that I do worry about. He'll start to reach for takedowns as the fight goes on. He'll go a little bit more for the hips and a little bit less for the shoulders, and I think those are some of the weaknesses that could start to show themselves against the higher levels of competition. Now, Esteban's a guy who will make you pay for some of those mistakes. I just don't know if he's going to be able to do that consistently enough throughout the fight, and that's the thing about Radzhabov. I'll be very curious to see when he starts to face adversity, because like you said, when he has the clear advantage over an opponent, he's able to out-wrestle them, he's really able to look like a well-rounded fighter, but once he does start to face some of those roadblocks, he does come back down to earth quite a bit.
And the weird part about this fight, you look at it for Ribovics, the level of competition's not there. The finishers are there. Now, again, all wins are by finish. 6 of them are in the first round, and if you look at some of these fights, go back to his fight on Dana White's Contender Series. He take on Thomas Paul, who's a champion over in Europe, and Paul was an underdog, pretty heavy underdog in that matchup, and out of that one, right hook drops him, and then he goes into the ground and pound, and it's really good ground and pound in that one. But you go through everything. I mean, they list him as an orthodox fighter. I put switch because he'll switch over to southpaw and throw that left hook out there. He'll throw the right hook to kind of lead the dance. He throws head kicks. His grappling game is very, very, unpredictable. Again, first round finisher. He's gone to the third round against 21-6 Jose Zaruz, who was actually a decent 21-6. Sometimes I rag on some of these records when you're on, some of these regional cards, but not that bad. He went into a third round in his first fight against a 1-2 fighter back in 2015. But for a young fighter to train at Killcliff FC, we continue to see these wrinkles in the game of Esteban Ribovics. He has the speed advantage. He tends to take a lot of straight shots too, But at the same time, what I saw, even in the Paw fight, and even in some of these fights against much lesser competition, he eats a lot of the hooks in his fight. That scares me a little bit in a fight against Radzhabov. But if you do look at it, Dana White after the fight on Contender Series said, I love your style. You're right up my alley, kid. Wow. Get over here. So he had nothing but nice things to say.
Like Scorpion from Mortal Kombat?
About Ribovics. And the big keys that I had to Ribovics, I put creative takedowns, nice body lock to a trip, which you'll see from Radzhabov. And then again, his overhand left walk-off knockout that he had against Aranda. It was kind of reminded me of a Mark Hunt at 155 pounds. So I like everything that I've seen out of Ribovics. I don't have a single negative thing to say other than he gets hit, but I mean, so does everyone. And so does Radzhabov. So this, when it does come down to it, is actually a very, very difficult fight to try and offer you a good prediction on, because they're both very volatile. They're both finishers to the nth degree. And for Radzhabov, kind of tough on a week's notice.
This is going to sound disrespectful, but this is one of the better pay-per-view like card openers between two guys that you may have not heard of. And I understand Radzhabov, he's been around for a little bit, so you might be familiar with him, but this is going to be a very high level and a very skilled fight between these two guys. So I was really curious to see who goes for the first takedown, because both guys do have that in their back pocket.
Well, Radzhabov's about a 2-1 favorite in the matchup. We have a look at the Topology votes. Really eager to see this because I have no idea where they're going to be. So surprised us there to you. I'm going to say name value alone and the fact that he was the number one overall seed in the PFL tournament in 2021. I'm going to say Radzhabov, but he hasn't fought in a little over a year.
True. I think he'll be the favorite, though.
Yeah, I'm going to say over under 75. So you say over in that?
I think it'll be over.
It's going to be over? It's under. Wow. Oh my gosh!
The other way around.
818 total votes, 63% Ribovics, 72% by knockout for the 37% that have Radzhabov, 78% by decision. So Radzhabov's favored. The fans overwhelmingly have Ribovics and to win by knockout. So that's kind of crazy. I mean, Radzhabov's never been knocked out before. In his fight against Zach Zane, he withstood a little bit of adversity in that Kimura. Wild how he got out of it. He's a guy that powers out of bad positions, which might not work at the highest level. Sometimes it does.
Exactly.
But this should be an amazing fight. I think we covered it angle to angle. Tough to offer up a prediction. So what is the pick?
I have Radzhabov, because this is the thing. Esteban goes for a lot of the same takedowns Radzhabov does, and I just think Radzhabov's the slightly better wrestler between these two. So if it does come to the wrestling engagements and the grappling exchanges, I think Radzhabov will end up on top. Now, will he get into a sticky situation here and there? Of course he could, but just because I do think he's going to be the one in the more dominant of the positions more often, that does favor it if it goes to the scorecards, and that's why I do have Radzhabov.
Yeah, Kenny Florian in Radzhabov's last fight said, and I quote, he has some trouble pacing himself in fights. And yeah, that's definitely been an issue when he burns really hot. But if he doesn't, it doesn't go too badly. For me, I'm going to go with Loik Radzhabov in this one. I like the hooks. I think they'll overcome the straight shots, which is something I don't say very often on this channel. But I'm going to say it for this fight. I think it's an amazing one. Great to have Radzhabov and Ribovics in the UFC. I can't wait for it. Let us know, please, down below in the comments section who you have in this firefight of a matchup at lightweight. Some great fights on this card. Jones versus Gane for the heavyweight title at the top. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.